Hey, shalom, guys, and welcome to Wisdom into Our Ministries. And like I always tell you, I'm always delighted and happy for the opportunity to share what I'm learning. And the last 15 years, as you know, I've been really researching and looking very much into ancient Near Eastern history and trying to connect the Bible. The narrative of Scripture is extremely important for us to remember that it was written to a different type of people in a different culture, in a different geographical location. And as believers, sometimes we fail to connect the people living in the time of the Bible with the language and the structure of what has been said. Now, in order to understand it a little bit more, I made friends with Professor Mark Chavalis, and he is so kind to come in and teach me every week. And basically, what we do is put out the class in public so that you can see what we do and how we dialogue. I want you to focus on how we connect information, how we validate, give you resources, how we exchange with one another. The whole purpose is not to argue and debate who's right and who's wrong, is to have an exchange and to have an educational, focus on education so we can grow. I learn a lot. I'm happy to have him around, and he's a baseball fan, so I like him even more. All right, so welcome, Professor. How are you?
I'm really good, and of course, right now it's football. I'm really happy because your local team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, did the Rams a favor by losing last night, so that was very good for me.
They don't
Uh,
do very well lately.
yeah, but in any event, and by the way, I like the plaid shirt. That's different from what you
Oh,
wore before. So
thank you. I'm trying to be a little bit more bright, instead
yeah,
of the dark
well,
stuff I use all the time.
yeah, it's so bright. It's the lumen is just shining in front of me. But I'll do my best to try to keep on looking.
Yeah, you got it. All right, so I'm excited about today. Before we get going, Professor, I want to recommend some people, some sources that I use that you recommend also. We were talking right before we went on air about some of the Bibles that are available to you. This is a chronological Bible. I just recently got this one, and you're actually one of the contributors on this one. Um, and I think is extremely valuable. It's very well done, by the way. I'm still trying to figure out how to use it because it's
Me
kind of
too.
divided up, huh?
Me too.
You too?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the New Testament specifically because they're connecting different events and they put in
Yes.
one page so you can follow along. But I got to tell you, the a lot of the Bibles sometimes they put a lot of their own ideas and their own interpretation. This one is legit. It's actually by some really impressive scholars,
Yeah.
and I like that because you have Timothy Cargill, it has you, Mark Chavalis has got Keener, which is very,
Yep.
very, important guy. They have John Wright. They have Mason. They had a few interesting people here that I read some of their work. John Goosh. Um, so I really like their stuff, and I think a chronological. What I like is you pick up some nuggets and information of the chronology of events. Sometimes we forget that. So this is a really great benefit to you. Do you have anything to add on this one in particular?
Well, it's a great study aid. You wouldn't use it, of course, in place of the Bible, but you would use it to help understand because for us, we need to try to reconstruct, these events, and this is a way to put it in a more orderly fashion because of course the Bible sometimes it's chronological and sometimes it's not because
Yeah,
it has a different purpose. And so this is a way for us to reconstruct something that that really helps us. And by the way, it though it does it that though it does it that way, of course, not everyone is going to agree with every step that they make. But that's the
true.
whole point of doing this is that they give their best shot, and that was done in the late '90s. I think the book is out of print, so I don't know where you got it. But anyway, um, but it helps people other people build on top of it. That's the whole point of scholarship. You and
Right,
I
right.
dialogue, and then we find, oh, this is what's common, we agree on, then we keep on going to a higher level, and that helps the next generation of people figure things out.
That's true. I have another one that is also a great benefit to me. Actually, let me show. Got books everywhere here. Let me show this one. It looks better. It's just the cover
Oh
for
yeah.
the Cultural Background Study Bible, which this is the first one I got when I started. In
Aha.
conjunction with your the IVP
Right.
and John Walton's Illustrated Bible Commentary, and this one, that was a great help when I started. It really gave me a direction of who to look for that were
Right.
credible scholars to start getting their articles and reading them. So
Yeah.
this one, I think, from a cultural perspective, go ahead.
Well, yeah. In fact, I was gonna say, because I mentioned this to you online, but frankly, everybody out there, Rico's already graduated. We're just sort of dialoguing right now. Uh, he's every time he tells me, "Oh, what about this source?" He hasn't been wrong yet,
All
and
right.
so he knows what to look for. He's been so immersed in this stuff. He is a certified geek. I don't know what the word in Spanish is for geek, but uh,
Yeah.
probably the same word. But
You can
he's
say
one.
certified geeky, geeky. Yeah, geek.
Yeah,
Yeah,
geeky.
it'll translate. Thank you for the compliment.
Yeah,
And lastly, but it's like I told you, it means a lot because um, literally there were times when I started that I felt like I was crazy.
yeah,
Literally, when I was by myself, I was I could only say there was only one person, two more people within the movement that I was involved in that actually kind of touched on it, but they noticed that it was not received, so they kind of let it be. But
yeah,
I was so immersed, I began to teach it everywhere, and literally I was by myself. People thought I was crazy, but to do it on my own and basically be self-taught to the point that now I'm able to hold a conversation with you and cite the right sources and be credible. Really, that's what we want. You and I, we're
yeah.
looking for one thing. We are servants of God and we want to be credible and responsible with
Yes.
everything that we quote, that we say, that we cite, because it's important that we do that. Lastly,
Amen.
we have the archaeological Bible. I really like the archaeology Bible.
Yes, that's another nice one.
I mean, I'm not saying that I agree with everything, but at least
No,
it's a good
me
guide.
neither. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good guide. So, also for today's teaching or class, I'm using, and you recommended this before,
Yes.
Laws in the Bible and the Early Rabbinic Collection, The Legal Legacy of Ancient Near East by Samuel Gringus. Very good resource.
Yeah. If another Mesopotamian scholar, I guess I think he taught at Hebrew Union
Yeah.
College in Cincinnati, and so it might be the one book I would probably have people look at if they wanted to try to understand, the ancient Near Eastern law and the Bible together. That probably would be the one book. And so it's
You know
just,
what he does here that's really good? That he takes a lot of also um,
yeah.
rabbinical understanding and trying to connect it all together, which very unique. Not many people do that. So
Well, and it's because they're not trained to do it. I don't have any training in rabbinics at all, and so somebody like that who's was Jewish. I'm assuming that Sam has passed away. He would be in his 90s. I don't know, but I think that came out in the early 2000s, if I remember.
yeah,
Um, but but somebody like them, they're doing. We as Christians, at least in traditional Christianity, let you think of traditional Protestantism, they're usually not trained to know anything about Judaism after the time of Christ, as if it didn't exist.
right.
But that's a terrible shame, because it really provides a tremendous context for understanding not only the New Testament but also portions of the Old Testament. And so, but that's just and so you just don't think about it in your curriculum. But somebody who's Jewish, of course, that's part of it, and that's why it's so important to study someone like that. And so for him, like I think I mentioned one of the other days, is that Gringus is the one who shows that a lot of the rabbinical laws come straight from Mesopotamia, because they're not found, in the Hebrew portion of the Bible.
Well, it only makes logical sense. I mean, they live in that environment, and you're dealing with righteousness and justice. You're dealing with justice, which was a prevailing message throughout the ancient Near East. And it's one
Yes.
of the things that really made me understand the Bible better when I began to look into the ancient documents we talked about before, and reading the law codes, all their
Yeah.
books, the treaties. I'm going like,
Yes.
oh my, now I understand. They're all dealing with the same type of environment, and the difference is how God's righteousness differ from the king's righteousness, and
Right.
justice, the way that it's applied in the Bible versus the way justice is applied, to the ancient kings. And
Right.
people don't make that contrast.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. And of
Yeah.
course, the point is that we should be following God first, of course, because He's God. Second, His justice is different. There's a lot of good in the other codes, of course. That
Yeah.
they do attempt to do justice, but they're flawed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and for them, the point was is that we're following the true God, uh, and that's why we're unique. That's why we're different than all the others.
That's why I like Christine Hayes, because having her Jewish background, she also sometimes
Yes.
gives you that insight. And just like Milgram, we were talking about Milgram, the writer of this particular three-book series.
Yeah.
And like you said, I'll talk about that for example. We're talking about he did his own translation of the text.
Yes.
Tell us from a scholarly perspective why that's important to the scholars. I'm kind of curious. You mentioned it to me, but I don't think the audience really understands what that is one of the exercises or scholarship trying to bring a translation to a text.
Well, you think about if you read a Bible, whether it's in Spanish or English,
I'm right here. Just keep going, okay?
yeah, if you read the King James or something else, you're reading something that was translated by committee. And so they come together, and it means that some people are obviously cannot be experts in every area. So if you studied the book of Esther your whole life, or like Milgram studied Leviticus, he's going to come up with his own very particular and unique translation, which will be as precise as he possibly can make it, rather than somebody who was working on a committee who might have basically worked on Leviticus for maybe a couple months rather than 20 years like Milgram had. And so when scholars do their individual translations, and they will do it for any major commentary, a scholar will make his or her own particular translation. That's where you want to go for precision, to find out whether, oh, this is what I think about such and such. Oh, I'll look at what it says in, the New American Standard Version, but now I'm going to go back and see what this commentary says, and to see, all right, how did he or she translate this? Because there's an argument about, the meaning of this particular passage. And so you're going to want to go with somebody who's spent, their whole, academic life working on this, to see, they're going to be at the top of the authority, I suppose. It doesn't mean they're always right, of course. It just
Yeah.
means that's why you really want to look at that.
And now I understand when I was reading Gain. Gain is one of the students of
Right,
Milgram.
Roy Gain. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he did an incredible book about cult, something else about blood, which, by the way, that's going to be the premise of our research. One of my students, Daniel, who's my friend, we're going to be on the temple course too. That's coming up
Uh-huh.
in May. That's for the temple course. That's going to be the main topic, is about the function and the role of blood in the offerings in relation to the temple, the tabernacle, and then what did the blood of Yeshua did in regards to
Uh-huh.
atonement. But in the book of Havmar, Israel and
Yes.
Egypt, he began to talk about the name and given the definitions from the Egyptian. And so Gain and Milgram and now Hafmeyer, when I was reading their stuff, I'm thinking, why is Gain spending almost a whole chapter trying to explain the structure of a verse in the book of Leviticus? And I'm thinking, I honestly did not understand the motivation. Now I get it. That's his way of establishing credibility.
Yeah,
That's
exactly
cool.
right.
All right, so let's get right into the topic of the day, which is supposed to be everything that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Nuzi and Emar. Give us a little history on that. And then after we talk a little bit about that, I would love to talk about adoption.
Yeah.
I have some notes. I want to make sure we read them so you can teach us more about that.
Well,
Nuzi, that's your specialty, right?
well, it's one of no, not necessarily. No, I wouldn't say it's my specialty at all, but I did write a few things on Nuzi. Nuzi is a small town in the north of Mesopotamia. It's in Assyria during the late Bronze Age, so between, let's say, 1500 and around 1200. It was a flourishing town, and it just so happens that the University of Chicago and began excavating there in that region in the late 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Kiara was the excavator, and they basically uncovered around 6,000 texts. And really, if you think about it, they found 6,000 documents or so from an average size small town.
Yeah, it
So
wasn't
this is
very big
really
for what I read. It wasn't very
no,
big at all.
It's not a big town at all, and from surrounding regions. And so, and these are private houses. A lot of them, a lot of the documents actually are coming from people who are living in what you might call suburbs. So they're outside the center of town, but they're rich. And
Yeah.
so the most famous of all these people, Tilla, is he's got I think a third of the documents, or maybe a quarter of the documents, are from his residence, and they're from a couple of generations. And so he's doing, he's got basically all the documents there. The cuneiform documents are um, during, the three or four generations of his family, and they're receipts that you and I might have. Obviously, if you go to Walmart and you buy food, you're not going to keep the receipt very long. But if you buy a TV set, you're going to keep it as long as you have the TV set, and you're going to file it somewhere. Hopefully you do, or you're going to have it next to your house contract, your marriage contract. I mean, you're going to put all those things together in a place where you can, have access to them. So we have all these documents. By the way, most of the personal names of the people at Nuzi are Hurrian, but they're all writing in Akkadian because that was the language that scribes wrote in.
Yeah. Repeat that again. That's important that people know.
The the personal names of most of the people at Nuzi are Hurrian. They're ethnically Hurrian, which was happening up in the north. I think we mentioned this before, that the name Mitanni used to be ruling the area. By now, it looks as if the Assyrians are ruling in this area. In fact, there you can see Nuzi just right
here,
south of where it says the Lower Zab. And so we're right smack in it. You can see Nineveh north of there. And so we're in that region. And like I said,
modern day Iraq.
Yes, not modern day Iraq. And so we're right near the Zagros mountain range to the east of there, but we're in the Mesopotamian river valley of the Tigris and Euphrates. And so these documents are basically, they're family documents. And so that's why it's really important that we have them. They're garden variety family documents. Yeah, here it says 4,000 clay tablets. It really depends on who you talk to. 6,500 has been the updated note, but again, sometimes people count tablets and fragments as,
that's different. Yeah, I read that. Yeah,
sometimes they don't. So it's hard to know exactly what it is, but it really is. Since they were found in the 20s and late 20s, early 30s, it made a big splash. One of the biggest Nuzi scholars at the beginning was this fellow, I think we mentioned before, Cyrus Gordon, who wrote dozens of articles on women at Nuzi, on Nuzi and the Bible. And the strength of Gordon is that he knew, everything about everything. The weakness about Gordon is that he made lots of connections that ended up not being substantiated very well. And so if you read his articles from the 20s and 30s, you have to look and see what people, how they reevaluated him. In fact, go ahead.
I think it will be logical to do so because he was living in an area that a lot of the information have not been deciphered, and more information came out later. So I think it's a process of development and growth. He was kind of maybe speculating a little bit based on connections. I don't know.
He speculates, and since he was such a powerful scholar, his speculations took on authority.
Yeah.
And then of course they would go from generation. It's kind of like his counterpart was W.F. Albright.
Yeah, like Albright. Yeah.
Well, Albright was in the same way. He made tremendous amounts of speculations, which ended up, not all of them could be substantiated over the test of time, but neither of those fellows can talk for themselves any longer. But anyway, so Nuzi.
So with that, excuse me, Professor, real quick. Yeah. So with that being said, so we have to measure, because I have Albrights and I have Hillers and I have read, Gordon's, which I have his books. I read 3 of them. So it's like they have their place, understanding that their work is not definitive. It's just they're still expanding and more corrections to be made from their work.
Like anybody else. Like anybody else. They trained so many people that they basically furthered knowledge, even if we might quibble over mistakes, and of course the same thing's going to happen with me and with you and with anybody else. We're just trying to find our way, and with God's help, we're contributing to the next generation. And of course, the ultimate goal is to understand God's word and understand him better. Anyway, Nuzi, average town. We talked about Ugarit last week.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice that the Nuzi texts are mostly contractual documents concerning families, which we don't have as many at Ugarit way on the coast. And they recognize very quickly that a lot of the family documents at Newsies seem to be shedding light on what's happening, in the book of Genesis. But it's not a perfect overlap. In fact, that's the problem. At the very beginning, they saw all this, and so everything that was happening that they found at Newsy was immediately applied to what was happening in the Bible, and vice versa. Now we realize it's probably a lot more complicated than that. I suppose it
But
would be like finding, here you are in 5000 AD, and you have the Magna Carta, and then you find, from England in 1200, and then you find laws in central Iowa from, the 1870s. You think, wow, look at that, there must be a connection here. Well, there is
yeah.
one, but it's pretty distant. And
So,
so,
with that being said, I got a question in regards to that because I use a lot of the everyday life and Nusi tablets as a backdrop because they're so close together in geographical locations, so there have
yes,
to be some similarities. Like for example, let me go back to the map there real quick so people can know what I'm trying to say. And by the way, this is one of the things that I use in my research, so I want to get your input on this. What I try to do is when I study, for example, um, Adam Param, Padam Aram, right?
yeah,
Which we know that Laban's house was in Haran, and we know that the influence of Mesopotamia between the rivers was
right,
so prevalent in the interconnection between cultures due to the travel and the importance of the city. So there are certain stories in the Bible, like the ones we're going to be talking about later, adoption, that I think the adoption language of the ancient Near East or the terms I think can bring light to the understanding of the language in Genesis 20:48, or the
yes.
story of Abraham with Eliezer, or maybe even with Jacob and Laban. Would
Oh,
you agree with it? Because it's the same time frame, around that same time frame, it could
well,
help us
it's
get it.
it's yes. I don't want to quibble over the specifics, but it's the overall general time frame seems to fit well. And so the writer of Genesis, Moses or Moses Prime, whatever it is, that group, that person or persons, they're clearly writing, and they understand that late Bronze Age context quite well. And so it's certainly the same cultural milieu. There's no doubt about it in my mind.
I mean, it's really fascinating to me when I read an article, let's say about anything in the ancient Near East. Because what I did, I will study the Torah portion. But then I would ask questions: when, how come, who, whatever, where, who are they, all that stuff. And then I say, well, wait a minute, why is it mentioning um, for example, the maid servants or the handmaid in the case of Hagar, and how Sarah wanted to send her away? So I asked the question: why did Abraham stay longer with her when in fact they had permission to divorce a woman who could not give birth? And
Yeah.
then why would Hagar ask Abraham to have why did Sarai ask Abraham to take Hagar, which seems unmanageable to us today,
Yeah.
but legally to them it was her way of preserving honor.
Yeah. Well,
And then the
preserving
next
honor in the family. Yeah.
exactly. So then my next question was, well, wait a minute. Why did she send her away? And then Abraham agreed, but then God blesses, the son of Hagar, which by the way, I have a thesis on this I'd like to present to you a little later. But I asked those questions. So I began to
Yeah.
start looking for articles. Okay, does anybody writing about Hagar? You know, and I drive myself crazy every week with like 10, 15 articles trying to read.
Yeah. Oh,
It
yeah.
was amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's because you're right. Their whole worldview is different than ours. They think differently. They've got, different perspective on things. For them, the first and foremost is making sure the family line continues, and you do it whatever way you do it. You bypass, cultural, legal, whatever. I mean, you find all the loopholes you can to make sure your family continues. So that's what That's what Sarai is, ended up doing. And so this child is going to be mine through Hagar, and Hagar evidently is Sarai's. I think we mentioned this last week. This is her property, and so she's just viewing her as property. So in spite of all that, God is going to bless Hagar and Ishmael. In spite of that, in fact, he blesses Abraham and Sarai in spite of all that,
Right. Right.
because of course they're messing up, and because you look at it and say, boy, that doesn't seem like an appropriate way of doing things. And of course, you think about it, even when they're doing all that, God had already said that you're going to have a physical descendant. So Abraham is pretty much trying to do it his own way. Well, nothing has happened, so maybe, and so maybe his wife is saying, well, that's not going to happen, so let's do it through my maid. That's how God's going to do it.
Well, but we also have to think in the mind of Sarai, because as you know, because you've done some intensive study of this, you know the pressure of a woman in the ancient Near East to give birth.
Yeah,
So you have a promise that you will be blessed, that nations will come from you, and your wife is going like, "What are you talking about? I can't have any children."
yeah.
I mean, her desperation to help him fulfill his destiny.
Right.
Because would you agree that if she did not push the envelope in this case, then he will have rights to divorce her, which means that she had no protection.
Oh, yeah, yes. He certainly had the legal right to divorce her, whether it's Israel or anywhere else. And like because even in Mesopotamian law, you can look at a contract where it'll say a prenuptial contract. A is marrying B. If B doesn't give forth a son within 3 years, he has the right to divorce her if he wants. He doesn't have to,
Yeah.
but you can put it right into the contract that she's not fulfilling uh, her duty, as if it was all the woman's responsibility.
Yeah, but was right. But it's interesting because we never question, we never understand Sarai's decision
Right.
based on the culture. We assume she was insecure, she was this,
Yeah.
when in fact she's defending her legacy.
Yeah, she's exactly right. That's the same thing that we mentioned this before. The same thing that Tamar is doing in Genesis 38 through really strange means. Uh, Rachel is doing the same thing. Even Hannah, if you think about it,
True.
in First Samuel, is
Yeah.
complaining to her husband, who basically says, "Well, aren't I a good husband? Aren't I better than 10 sons to you, or whatever she says?" And of course she's she she's she wants him to help her fulfill her vocational destiny, which is the whole point of a woman is she's being brought into the family and she's extremely important because the line will continue through her.
Right.
And if she's not able to do it physically, then she has to make the arrangements to do it with someone else. And if she doesn't, then she's probably sacked.
So really
She's
quickly
removed.
before we go into the adoption thing, um, because this is definitely your area of expertise. You have a study on logos. I highly recommend everyone who has logos to purchase it. Is the study on women in the ancient Near
Oh
East.
yeah.
So, with your understanding about what would happen to a woman who is divorced or widow in the ancient Near East, now when you look at the stories, it makes sense what they're doing.
Right. And of course, if she's divorced, she gets a double dowry back. Legal.
Uh-huh.
That's the traditional prenuptial agreement. If she's young enough, she goes back to her father's house. But like a free agent, she's doesn't have a lot of her biological clock is probably ticking. If she's past 35,
No
it's over
value.
for her. And
Right.
so
Right.
she's probably going to stay a widow, and she's probably going to depend upon her brothers or someone in her family to take care of her if she doesn't have enough. So divorce is a catastrophic thing. Even if she gets her inheritance, it's
Yeah.
a catastrophe.
So returning her to the father's house was to protect her,
Yes.
to protect her honor, to get the door dowry. Talk a little bit about that because many people don't know that in the ancient Near East, a bride would get a dowry from the groom and a dowry from the father.
Well, yeah, she gets a what happens is this. the 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 husband pays the bride price, okay,
Uh-huh.
to the father. The father then gives the dowry to the daughter is basically the inheritance that she's getting, and so she's getting it in real life
Well, he's a
before her
oh.
father dies.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait, it's as if he dies.
Yeah, so in other words, he doesn't have to die yet, and so
Yeah.
that's why, in a sense, you marry your daughter off. It's a big financial investment because let's say you have 4 kids, you're getting a fifth of the estate is goes to the daughter, probably in installments. By the way, everybody's different,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
and say I could say, hey, honey, I can't afford to give you half the farm right now, but we'll do it in installments, and so here's my contract or whatever.
That's
Uh,
cool.
and of course the husband knows that, um so though he can take advantage of the fruit of that dowry. If they happen to divorce, she has to get the equivalent of that times 2 back, and so there's definitely a protection clause in. And so this was common throughout the whole Near East. Certainly it was common in Israel, even if it's not not always addressed in an obvious way, but it's pretty well known. And we mentioned this before about Deuteronomy 24. And I think that's what's going on there, is that woman
Yeah.
is being sent away without her dowry. Um, and that's the evil part of that. So
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. It's interesting when you start recalling all the stuff that you read, and then you have the dialogue with somebody who knows in that area. You start connecting all the things. I like that. So when
good.
you have the Nuzi tablets, what was the impact in the archaeological and also in the scholarly world when they found the Nuzi tablets in regards to the biblical understanding? Because it does have some biblical connotations there, like connections.
Well, at the beginning, it was what I call in my Mesopotamia in the Bible book. At the beginning, with most of these sites, if they find a site, it becomes parallelomania. In other words, anything they find, oh my goodness, let's connect this to the Bible, let's connect that to the Bible. And so and like I said, Gordon was at the forefront of that. But like I said, Gordon had so many things in his mind. He's just speculating. Gordon went off into Greece. He claimed that he deciphered linear A from Crete. And it just, I mean, he just did all these different things. And so he's at the forefront of that with authority. Other people that are less authoritative than him, made all these interesting speculations before World War II. It began to die down after a generation. The same thing happened with the Ebla tablets, which we haven't talked about yet, but that's on the coast. They were found beginning in the late 70s, and so that also caused an uproar. Now, we on your docket was also Emar, which is on the Euphrates River, and I think it has even a closer connection to the Bible, because the ethnic group of the people at Emar are West Semitic Amorite types, and so it would be just north of Mari, right about there, right about where the P is, but on the
Yeah.
Euphrates River would be Emar. It's another small town, uh, and it's mentioned in the Ebla text in the middle of the 3rd millennium, but we find documents there. It was they were found rather what's the word I want to use? Sort of incognito. The Syrians were making a dam, and so a lot of the areas up in the north were going to be flooded. And so the Syrians in the early 70s made a call to yeah, there it is. There, right up there, just Tel Fray. And so there's Amar right on the
Oh, yeah.
Euphrates. As you notice right now, it's right in the middle of the Tabqa Dam.
Right.
The Tabqa Dam didn't exist until the early 70s. And so they were calling out in international teams, please come in and work on some of these sites because they're going to be flooded. And so they jumped in on Amar, not knowing that what they were going to find. And so at Amar, which is a small town, not that different than Nuzi, they found another 5,000-6,000 tablets, and none of them are associated with the crown. Just like at Nuzi, they're not royal tablets at all. And the biggest cache was found in the house of the diviner. He's like the high priest of the town, I suppose, is sort of analogous to that. another 1,000 plus tablets. And he has, they're West Semitic peoples. They're probably Amorites, although the term isn't really being used any longer. Oh yeah, Anson Rainey was just like the top. Anything geographical that has Rainey's name on it, just put your hands on it. He was just a brilliant
Yeah.
scholar. Nice
Big-
nice
big-
man. But when I went to meetings, if Anson Rainey opened his mouth, everybody just sat and was quiet to listen to him.
That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, he was
Yeah,
just
that his book, The Sacred Preach, I have it in a hard copy.
yeah,
Oh, expensive. And then I
yeah,
got it in
yeah,
logos. And as I read through it, they take, I love it because he takes all the ancient languages and he breaks them down. And it is amazing what you learn. The Elamorna documents, the
yeah,
letters. Wow. Talk
yeah,
about making a connection with the whole. It's like, exchanging between kings and vassals and stuff. It's really
yeah.
fascinating stuff.
And so the Emar people were probably ethnically very similar to the Hebrews, especially because the Hebrews are claiming that their ancestry comes from, northern
The
Mesopotamia up
Amorites, right?
there. And
The
so
Amorites.
it's pretty much the same people group in many respects, although they're also writing in Akkadian because that's the language that you write your tablets in. They're not writing it, in fact, anything else. And so the personal names there are a interesting mix. The Hittites um, were there for a while, and then they're ruled by Assyrians, and then Emar is finally destroyed around 1150 or so BC. But the tablets, the tablets of the diviner, he has a lot of contracts, but he also has rituals, and the rituals are really interesting. One of the most interesting ritual, the Zukru ritual, is where over a period of a week they take the city gods and they take them out of the city, 12 of them, to meet a group of ancient stones, which evidently are kind of like the Joshua stones. They're memorial stones that are
Boundary
representing divine
markers.
beings.
The
By the
boundary
way,
markers.
the top deity here is Dagon,
Right.
and the old gods meet the new gods in this memorial, and they sort of rehearse their treaty that they've had
Huh.
on an annual basis. And so this was remarkably similar, and helps understand what's going on in places like Joshua and elsewhere.
Would that be considered that ritual as a covenant renewal type of
Yes,
ritual?
yeah, exactly. It's a covenant renewal.
So what we have in Joshua chapter no, Deuteronomy chapter 27, 28,
Yep,
and also Joshua 24,
yep,
and also the Last Supper will fall under that category, a
right.
covenant to
And
renewal.
it's exactly what it is. And so, and you think about Joshua, and someday you're going to look at these and say, what mean these stones? And these stones, of course, a memorial. They're not obviously gods for Joshua, but they are there to for you to look at them and to remind you of the covenant that was made. And so there's all sorts of things, going on that sort of they, they shed light on the biblical stuff that for us, frankly, doesn't make a whole lot of sense
Yeah.
until we see it in its context. And so the fellow who's worked most on Emar and the Bible is Daniel Fleming. And I think I forgot to tell you when I was giving you Emar stuff, is that Daniel wrote a really nice article on Emar and the Bible in here.
Oh, nice.
So if you want to look like at a one chapter, that's where I would go. It's better than the
I read a few of the articles on that book.
better than this one. And this is, I think, I when I pulled this together for people to look at, it's fine. But I think that Daniel Fleming's article in the Mesopotamian the Bible is best for somebody who wants like a one shot understanding of why this stuff is so important. And it has different type of documents than they have over at Ugarit, and so it's sort of a different puzzle piece
Yeah. Do,
to
do you
pull
think
in.
do you think that a person who reads the what we call the Tanakh or the Old Testament, um, if you don't have a foundation, specifically in ancient cosmology or ancient cultures or even like topics like adoption that we're going to be talking about, then you're not really going to catch some of the nuances of the text. For example, Jacob adopting Ephraim and Manasseh. I had a question to a friend of mine who's a rabbi in Israel, really nice man, and I asked him, I said, "Hey, I got a question for you. So how can Ephraim and Manasseh be part of the 12 tribes when their mom was a pagan idolater
Yeah,
Egyptian woman? And, it was an interesting conversation because something that happens within the religion of Judaism, just like in Christianity. So it's not necessarily anything negative, just the way the religion works. They only focus on their commentaries, just like a nominal Baptist or,
yeah,
Methodist. It's only the crazy scholars who are able to separate, the theology versus the
right.
information. I'm trying to reconcile both. So
Oh yeah,
I'm trying to reconcile both, and maybe that's why Gordon took such a big step because he was probably a believer. I'm pretty sure he's trying to connect the Bible to the audience,
yeah,
getting the Christians to say, "Hey, this is some very important things we got here for you. Look into it," and it's the only way to get their interest.
yeah. I think you're absolutely right.
It's like when we say, "Well, we need to find Jesus in the Old Testament," and I'm going like, I made a comment this Saturday when I was teaching. So sometimes we want to look at Yeshua within the Torah and we put him in places that surely nothing has anything to do with him.
Yeah,
And instead of
you're
looking
exactly
for
right.
the redemptive plan of God that he will do through the Messiah within the story narrative.
You're exactly right. That's the way to do it, because otherwise you're looking for this one-to-one correspondence, which the Bible does not do.
Right.
And so, when he says that you can find me in the Old Testament, he doesn't mean from a literal standpoint. He
Yeah.
means that I'm fulfilling all of this. It's all leading up to me. And so,
Yeah.
you can understand that if you reread it. But if you think about it, how many people figure that out? Zero.
Yeah.
And so if it was you and me back there trying to figure it out, we wouldn't have been able to figure it out either. And so God understands that. That's why I'm glad He's so merciful with us and patient.
For sure.
Uh,
But do you think though that now, like right now, we have presented in the time that we've been here together, we have presented three resources here that were not available 100 years ago, like
right.
this, in one compendium.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
not even 50 years ago, really.
not even 50 years ago. I
Yeah.
mean, when I read Milgram's work, which is by far one of my favorite writers, and in the work of Leviticus alone, you know, how can someone focus on one book for 30 some odd years and write three volumes? It's incredible the commitment. They didn't really have this
No.
back 200 or 300 years ago.
Oh, no, not at all.
You
Not at
know,
all.
so do you think do we really truly, if there's a nominal Christian or anyone who follows the Torah like we do and believes in Yeshua, really have an excuse today not to take, at least know the most basic principles of culture and language and those things to know the Bible better though?
Yes, and I'm going to try to put it on a more positive spin, is that we have all of these resources that are now something that even the average person can just take a look at. And if they've got good training like you obviously, you figured out how to use your brain. And so you're using your brain, you're using it from a critical standpoint. I'm gonna guess mom and dad
Yeah,
trained you really well. And so they taught you not to take anything at face value. So you're figuring all this out. And so you're right. Here you are doing all this work, wondering, all right, am I crazy? And of course, I've been able to confirm that yes, you are.
I know, right? It's
But
great.
but the point is that the in the last 30 years especially, is that so much of this stuff is online. And so this is why you can go to a place like Bible Hub and you can look at the interlinear to, even if you don't know any Hebrew or Greek, you can look at that and say, all right, this is what that word means. This is what this word means. Oh, if there's any contention about it, then I go to the authorities to find out why they believe such
Right.
and such. And of course, you find out the authorities don't always agree with each other. And so you're going to say, okay, here's my best shot. This
Yeah.
is where I am
I,
at this point.
I was doing a temple. I took my temple course teacher, my temple teacher, good friend of mine. He's been studying the temple 44 years. He's one of the foremost authorities in the temple in the world, recognized by certain rabbis in Israel. So on the first course, I invested, just like you did for the digging. I wanted to go and learn about temple archaeology and temple geography, all that stuff, right? And I went, and he goes, "Hey, by the way, that resource is good, that one is good, and that one is really good." Well, when I look at one of them, it's $300.
Yeah.
And I'm going like, oh my Lord, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, well, if I want to be an expert in this area. And then I looked into the person who wrote the book, who did the research. Her name was Eilat Mazar.
Yeah,
She
right.
passed away 2 years ago.
Yes.
I had the privilege to meet her.
Wow.
And
Neat.
actually, I learned something from her. She says, Rico, evidence establishes truth. Just present the evidence.
Yep.
And I remember that she's the granddaughter of Professor Benjamin Mazar,
Right.
and she's been digging on the Temple Mount and City of David, all that stuff for 35 years.
Yeah.
And she put in one book, 35 years worth of book.
Yeah.
$300 is nothing. They
Yeah.
catalog every single stone.
I know.
It's crazy. And now you know what? I got the research. I take the map, and when I go to Israel, I literally know where everything is. Do you realize how much that's helped me in my tours to Israel?
Yeah. It's incredible. She
Amazing.
was an academic rock star.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
And I
Yes.
read all her stuff, and I'll tell you, and what impressed me about her is what impresses me about you is the fact that you are so knowledgeable in your area. Yet you guys all recognize, and I've seen this. This is a consensus with every scholar I met, except for one in particular, who is nice guy, but he knew he was special. Guess he is, but anyway, he knew it. Anyway, but the humility to understand that we're still learning,
Yeah.
the confidence of the information that you know, but the humility to understand that you still don't know. The archaeology will come tomorrow, can
Yep.
change your whole thing.
Yep.
And I don't
Exactly.
think we get that as believers sometimes. We're so concrete and dogmatic about stuff. We
because
lose.
because we're trained to believe that about our theology, and even our theology, we have to realize, is based upon our power of being able to interpret the Bible. It's God who's the authority. And I don't know if I brought this up before, but even when was one of the terms that evangelicals use, inerrant, infallible. Well, the Bible doesn't use, those are negative terms. That
Yeah.
uses positive terms. The Bible is powerful. It has the power to change you, to make you into a son of God. That's the power it has. And so we should accentuate the positive things and not our ability to interpret it, because we're always going to be mistaken. God simply wants our heart, our mind and our heart, like he says in Deuteronomy
Mhm.
6.
Correct.
That's you give me that and I'll take care of the rest. Don't worry about all the specifics, do the best you can. I got you covered.
Okay, so with what you just said, you're just leading into the next topic, which is if God gives us the power to be called the sons of God, clearly the
Yeah.
Bible says that you have been given the right, which is a legal term, by the way, you have been given the right to become the sons of God.
Yes.
And why do we need to be adopted in order to be in the kingdom? I think the best way to understand that is through your experience in the ancient Near East. So, how does the ancient Near Eastern culture included a person who is not part of the family, but yet made him legally binding, adopted him into? We have examples like Moses becoming a prince, but yet he survived the water. That's another topic. He was adopted by the daughter of Pharaoh. And then we have Ephraim and Manasseh. We have Eliezer with Abraham.
Yeah.
We have even Isaac. I'm sorry, Ishmael.
Yes.
People don't realize that. Well, Ishmael, and as you know, you study the Greco-Roman world and the Roman Empire. If a pater familia, the head of the family, he is going to, a baby is born, it's what I read in an article. If he puts his face to him and picks him up or looks at him, he's accepted. If he
Yes.
turns around, walks away, he is thrown out to the dogs. You know, that's crazy. They
And
were
that's the
rejected.
in the Near East, the same thing is happening. If we're talking like this and I decide I turn around because I don't want to talk with you anymore,
Right.
that's a rejection. And so it really is no different, that whole issue of looking at like. But yeah, you're right. So adoption is basically getting a status change. And so you're changing from one status to another status, and it's usually a higher status. And so in fact, they don't even use the word adoption. The term for adoption is attaining sonship.
Right.
And so
Ah.
it's a little different
So
than
so when God says, I'll put my face, we talk face to face, but then
yes,
when Israel disobeys, Israel turned her back, or
yes,
he's removing his face from them.
right,
That's I'm rejecting you,
yes.
but you're still my sons.
Yeah. So it all depends on the context. Is this momentary or permanent? You know,
Correct.
or what have you is the point. So,
I had some notes, and you're
yes,
talking about sonship. And if you would allow me,
sure, go
and
for it.
I asked you about this particular scholar. You told me that I picked correctly,
Oh yeah,
Mendelssohn, and he says in his article, he says none of the adoption cases recorded in the historical books of the Bible contains such precise legal terminology as the case of Ephraim and Manasseh. The phrases solemnly pronounced by Jacob before his death to signify the act of adoption of his grandchildren are almost identical with the Babylonian adoption formulas employed throughout the ancient Near East. I
right.
I'm blown away because when I read that for the first time, that's when my research on adoption, because I was doing a study uh, as to why the Bible in the New Testament says that we have not been given the right to be called the sons of God, which I knew that was a legal term.
Yes,
How do we become sons of God? And I'm thinking, well, God came to restore the covenant. God sent his son to restore the covenant with Israel, covenantal renewal.
right,
So how will the Gentiles fall into us? Because there's not one evidence in the Bible in which God of Israel made a covenant with Gentile nations. He
right.
made the covenant with Israel. So how would the nations be blessed in Abraham if they're not physical family of Abraham? Could the adoption language is paramount to understand to know this?
I think
Yeah,
it is because you're right. I mean, really, and even of course, in God's covenant with Abraham, he tells him that all the nations will be blessed through you. And so there is, so I suppose you could say in one respect that the Goyim, the Gentiles are going to get that they participate that. In fact, if you think about it, Abraham's a Goy himself.
correct.
He can't be Hebrew. There aren't any Hebrews yet.
I know
Uh,
that's true.
and so they might come from him, and so he's got to be something. And I think he's an Amorite, but we can talk about that
Yeah.
again. So
So let me read a few verses and then you give
yeah,
me your understanding on this. Let me start with the New Testament. I'm going to go backwards. In Hebrews 5:5, it talks about those also Messiah did not glorify himself to become high priest, but the one who said to him, and he's quoting Psalm 110:4, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Now it's a royal type title, as it
right,
says in ancient Near Eastern documents, correct?
yes,
Now, in
and
some, go ahead.
so he's basically connecting the fact that the one who is going to inherit my throne is this son. It doesn't mean that he wasn't his son before. It doesn't mean it means that I'm taking this particular one. That's the one who is going to inherit my throne, this
So
particular son. So it doesn't mean that you are necessarily outside the family. It just means that your status is now going to be very particular.
So that goes along with the rituals of liminal phases of an enthronement ceremony in regards
Yeah.
to. Okay, so then you have Matthew 3, verse 16, 17. Now, after he was baptized, it's interesting. Joseph is going to be immersed, change of garments. He is shaved, and then he's presented to the to Pharaoh, and then he's enthroned as second in command.
Yeah.
We see the same blueprint. It says, after he was baptized, Yeshua immediately went up from the water, new creation. It's a change of status there too. And behold, the heavens opened and saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove coming from upon him. And behold, there was a voice from heaven saying, this is my beloved Son, whom I have, and I am well pleased. Would that line up like what you just said with ancient Near Eastern status scripture?
Absolutely. This is God's recognition that I am now making a public declaration that this is the one who inherits well, he inherits everything, of course, because if you're God, you own
Yeah.
you own everything. And so he's and and so in other words, it's got to be done legally. And so the fact that Christ is now doing all these deeds, almost like Hercules, he has to go through each deed and fulfill them. And we might look at it from our standpoint, well, he was perfect. Of course he was going to do all of them. No, he actually has to do them. In the same way that Saul, you think about it, when Saul, it's kind of like an anointing. It's not the same thing, but it's similar to being anointed, is that you're now being installed and given that particular title. So Saul, there's a couple of anointing ceremonies, because first there's a declaration that he's king, but then he has to actually do something to show that he's king-like.
Kill Amalek.
Yeah, yes. And then and so
Right.
and so there and then the tribes have to go and proclaim him. And so there it's almost as if, I suppose it's kind of like being a president elect,
Pretty
and you have
much.
to go through all these processes and go, and the Senate has to do this and blah blah blah.
Well,
You know,
it's the connection like Yeshua, the Messiah, for example, King Saul, Moses was installed as the authority by God to lead the
yes,
kingdom, and he defeated Amalek in the wilderness. Then you have Saul, he has to defeat Amalek. Then David, he has to defeat Amalek. Now we know the enemy of God has always been Amalek, and then Yeshua, the Messiah, comes and he defeats death through the resurrection. So
right,
it's the same blueprint. And it's interesting. Philippians talks about Yeshua being exalted to a high position of honor by God, but it's based because he brought forth righteousness and justice. Everything he did
right.
is based on, revealing God's righteousness and justice. So let me go to the next verse, because I think what I'm trying to do today is do what you say Gordon did, trying to connect some of the ancient language with the
Yeah,
Bible. In First Chronicles, chapter 17, verse 11 and 14. It's a really interesting verses. Okay, and I'm going to read it here real quick. It says, this is when God is speaking to Solomon. Okay. And it
yes,
shall be that when your days are fulfilled, go and sleep with your ancestors. Then I will raise up your seed after you, and will be one of your sons. Talking to David about the future king. I
yeah,
will establish his kingdom. He will build me. He will build for me a house, a temple, and I will establish his throne forever. I myself will be a father to him. He himself will be a son to me.
yeah,
And I will not remove my steadfast loved loyalty from him, and I took it away from whomever was before me. Okay, so this verse 13 is huge. It's an adoption,
yeah.
like you just said it, in order for him to become king.
Right. And it's the legitimacy of the line going from David to Solomon. This is the claim. And so again, we have to realize what adoption is. It's not, we only think of adoption as, well, I just brought a kid into my family. It's that's part of it, but it's more than that. It's establishing your status as the one who is the primary inheritor. Um, and
So,
that's
so,
exactly what's going on there. And that's what happens with Christ, of course.
so do you think then that's why the writer of Galatians, for example, Paul,
Yeah,
he's using the whole issue with Hagar and Sarah and Isaac and Ishmael as a foundation in regards to the inheritance, because the whole topic in Galatians is about justification and the inheritance. I think it's quite interesting how it uses the language, and I think that's one thing that's been missing from, I'm recommending to my Christian brothers to consider the law of adoptions from the ancient Near East into the storyline in Galatians to understand what Paul's trying to say. Because he says in verse 5, in order that he might redeem those under the law, in order that we may receive the adoption.
yeah,
And because you are sons, God sent out the spirit of his son into our hearts.
yeah,
And then verse 7 says, this is it, and you're no longer a slave to death, but a son, and if a son, also an heir through
yeah,
God.
yes.
I mean, that's ancient Near Eastern adoption language.
Yeah, it's being a Christian my whole life, and then you sort of get immune to this stuff. But if you read it in context, it's like, wow,
Right.
wait a minute. I you had and because we don't understand this because we've sort of democratized our culture. But can you imagine? You used to be a slave. Now you're the owner of everything. You own Trump Tower. You used to
Yeah.
be walking around homeless, in New York City, and now you own everything. That's exactly what's happening.
Do you think that, with that being said, do you think that's why the Bible in the New Testament says that Messiah has redeemed us to be kings and priests and to be his
Yes.
sons so that we have the inheritance? Ephesians 1 talks about that,
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, Ephesians is really one of my favorite New Testament books because it summarizes all of the other Pauline letters, especially the first three chapters. Like, look
Yeah.
at all these riches. Why wouldn't you want to do this? come alongside with us. Can you imagine your lot in life is so terrible? Look at this stuff. Um, and so, yeah, that's exactly what's going on. And here we are as Gentiles, we can come in too. We're grafted onto the tree,
Yeah.
onto the olive tree. And what is it, Romans 11? So, we get this too. And so it makes perfect sense in ancient Near Eastern formulas.
What will be the attitude of someone who has no family identity? And we're going to read some of the laws of Hammurabi in regards to this and connect it with Genesis 48. But what will be the reciprocity of someone who had no honor, no family, no inheritance, no land? Tell us why was owning land such a big deal in the ancient world? I'm trying to convey that to people that don't seem to grasp it.
I think owning land is so important because it it ties you to everything. When your parents and your grandparents, when they die, you bury them in the land. And since they still have, we talked about this before about the whole issue of life and death, is that they still have an existence there. And so this land, it's not just that, oh, your ancestors had the land, your ancestors are still part of the land. And so you own that land. There's a connection between you and, 5, 10, 20 generations. And so if you had to sell that land, that would be the most catastrophic thing in your entire existence, because you're basically uprooting, everything that has happened. This is right or wrong. And of course, Genesis 50, I think we talked about this. Here's Joseph saying, take my bones with you. I don't want to
Right.
stay here, because they have this, I probably misguided understanding about the fact that, I must have some sort of consciousness along with my body, and so I don't want to stay here in Egypt. This isn't the land that we were promised. It's up there.
Right. And that was the whole identity was based on who you belong to, what
Yes.
clan you belong to. That's why they had the father's last name. They bear
Right.
the honor of the father.
And why, of course, when Jacob looks at all his sons, the sons who are born from a concubine are considered socially less than the ones that are born from the first wife, the first two wives. And of course, that's why Joseph can become the legal firstborn, because he's from the son of the wife that Jacob prefers. It's not, of course, um, the best way to do things, but that's just how it worked out legally.
Well, that's interesting because ancient Near East allowed that to happen.
Yes.
Um, but then later on, Moses fixed us in the Torah. He says, "No, we don't need. I don't think we want the family dysfunction anymore. So
Yeah.
whoever the first wife is, that's the firstborn.
Yeah. Right.
Which I'm glad he did that amendment that the Torah fixes that social issue because I think people forget that the storyline and narrative is trying to teach us a message. How much time I got? Because we didn't cover as much as we
Maybe
could.
10. So let's, yeah,
Okay.
about 10 or so.
Yeah, okay. So people sometimes read the narrative and they trying to spiritualize everything
Yeah.
and they don't realize, like for example, I just fixed my position about Joseph. I was teaching for a long time that Joseph was the immature little kid who was just telling on his brothers, and I realized that he was actually a honorable man, young man doing the
Yeah.
right thing, and
Yes.
that's why his father selected him because he had that integrity that a man of God should have.
And,
And
and the fact that he's the firstborn son of his favorite wife didn't hurt either.
exactly, but that whole but legally he could do that.
Yes. Yes.
But then later on, the Torah kind of makes an amendment for the Hebrews saying, okay, let's fix that issue. We don't want to have that again,
Right.
because it was a big deal to be the firstborn son and the
Right.
responsibility that came along with that. I know you got 10 minutes, so let me go through
Well,
here
you
real
want to
quick.
go to Genesis 48 because that's the
Yes, sir.
kicker.
Yes, sir.
Um,
Genesis 48, and let me go back. Genesis 48, for the audience, this is the adoption of Ephraim and Manasseh.
yeah.
I got my notes right here anyway. So what I really like is when he gets here in verse 6 forward. No, verse 5
Yeah.
says he's actually going back to what God told him. Behold, your father is ill, two sons have from Manasseh. I was told to Jacob, behold, your son Joseph, I come to you. Then Israel gathered strength and sat up in his bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai appeared to me in Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and make you numerous. I'll make you a company of nations. Melo Hagoim. Very interesting. It's
Yeah.
connected with something else. And I will give this land to your offspring after you as an everlasting possession. And now your two sons have been born to you in the land of Egypt before coming to you in Egypt are mine.
Yeah.
That is wow. That is so cool. That's adoption language.
Yeah, and I think that what's going on there, because we're not sure all the specifics, but it's obviously when we think of adoption, we think, oh, they're going to move into Jacob's house. Well, no, Jacob can't take care of anybody. He's
Right.
giving them a higher status. And the guess is, and I think that Hamilton is the one that brought this up, is that, well, Joseph probably got knocked down to a slave status according to, what happened to him. And so he's basically building them back up to have this the status of a son reinstated, and of course the purpose of that is to show why the Joseph tribes are very, very important later on, and they have legitimacy along with all the other tribes because Jacob basically raised their status back to where it should have been.
I got a question. I have a thesis that I don't teach it because I don't teach anything that I'm not sure about.
Sure.
But understanding this and understanding in Egypt, it was the same way. When the Pharaoh is going to put somebody in position, they have to go through a rite of passage, almost like an adoption. Changing of a name is
Yes,
one sign of
right.
that. So, do you think that when Joseph was adopted by Pharaoh, because I believe he was adopted by Pharaoh, now he understands that the inheritance that was supposed to be him as the firstborn now they're giving a blessing to divide it up into his two sons. Could that be possible?
I suppose, it's interesting. You brought up the fact that he had, he married a pagan wife. And of course, in the Apocrypha, Joseph and Asenath, the rabbis go to great pains to make sure that we all know that she converted because
Yeah,
otherwise it doesn't look very good.
I know.
But I don't know, whether she did or not. I wouldn't say it's immaterial, but it's not the point. Is that he's but the
But
Bible
the issue, but the issue is fixed when the issue is fixed in this chapter when Jacob adopts them both.
right, and Joseph doesn't argue because for him that means they're getting a status change within the context of my family now. In other words, I'm being reinstated by my family because that hadn't happened. Yeah, it's like you go away and you do all these great things, but your family still thinks you're a boob. And
Right.
then finally on your dad's deathbed, okay, I'm so glad, something, welcome back to the family. And you're thinking that's all I wanted from the beginning.
Of course. But
And
if
that's
I what
I think that's what's going on in Genesis 48.
yeah.
It's not explicit because it's probably pretty obvious to everybody reading it.
Yeah, well what I like is that when it continues, now Jacob is telling them they're mine. And it
Yeah,
says Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine as Reuben and Simeon are.
just like my
Uh
sons. Yeah,
yeah, when I went back to the law 170 of the
right.
Hammurabi Code, if the first wife of a man has borne him sons, and also his slave girl has borne him sons. And during his lifetime, the father has said to the sons, the slave girl bore him, my sons, they shall reckon them together with them, first wife's son.
You're right.
After the father has passed to his destiny, the first wife's son and the slave girl's son shall share out the treasure of their family's house equally. An heir, the son of the first wife, shall have the choice which shall the share to take. It's kind of interesting how they talk about in the Hammurabi Code.
Right.
Um, I think this will apply also to the story of Hagar.
I agree that Abraham has to claim him as his son. Yes, this is my son. Then of course Hagar is able to have a status. Otherwise, um, he's just a slave. In fact, you think about it, that the confusing thing about Hagar is that it sounds like he's legally Sarah's son, but she rejects that. And
Yeah.
he, of course, now is connected with his biological mother, uh, Ishmael. But
Right.
Abraham continues, and Abraham claims him as his legal son, but
Well, he called them son.
right. And so that's the good part. The bad part is
Well,
obviously
so
they had
what?
dysfunctional family.
Yeah, would that actually explain in Genesis when Hagar is sent away that then God gives her the blessing. He gives
Yes.
them. I this is my thesis. I believe legally God did something that Abraham should have done because he
Yes.
sent her away with hardly anything.
Right.
But the fact that the Lord intervened there and made it's the same type of share of the inheritance. 12 tribes, 12 clans, a great name, a great name.
Yeah.
Be numerous like Israel. It's an equal type of share of the inheritance.
Yeah.
Now I understand why the Saudi Arabians, the House of Saud or the Arabs, they don't really fight for Jerusalem. They know they have their identity. They
Yeah.
have their ancestral land. You notice that, right? It's
Oh
only
yeah.
people who have no inheritance that are fighting for the land of Israel.
Yeah.
I
You're
find that
exactly
interesting
right.
how ancient Near Eastern adoption laws have an impact in today's behavior in the geopolitical arena.
Oh, absolutely. I agree.
One more thing. I know you got to go, but
That's all right.
we got all excited about talking about all this stuff. Says, and your children whom your father after them shall be yours. So he's not telling you that Joseph did not have any other children.
No, yeah. In fact, I assume he did, but we're not privy to what that means. And whether he did or not, it's I wouldn't say it's irrelevant. It's not the point. The point is that these children have been upgraded, and they are part of the family. And of course, the fact that Jacob claims them as sons, meaning now that's why they're become two tribes. In other words,
Right.
Ephraim and Manasseh are become the Joseph tribes. In fact, there is no Joseph tribe. Um, there's two Joseph tribes.
Correct.
And so that's the explanation for why they're named in the 12 tribes.
Correct. So it says, by my name, which is another language of ancient Mesopotamian. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Right?
By the
Uh-huh.
name of their brothers, they shall be called with respect to their inheritance. This is the whole issue. By the way, Galatians, Ephesians, in some of the letters of Paul are all written in regards to the status change of the believers who were Gentiles in the
Right,
Greco-Roman world and how they now have part of the inheritance through that being adopted into the kingdom or being
right,
grafted in. He's using different languages. And I like to finish it up. I like this verse right here. It says, when Israel saw the sons of Joseph, he said, who are these? Then Joseph said to his father, they are my sons whom God has given to me. And he said, please bring them to me and I will bless them. Now, and then he says, may my name be in them. So there are verses in the Bible. Got to go all the way back. I made all these notes and I couldn't cover. I talked too much. Um, in which talk about, oh, sorry. Go back to Genesis 48 here. No, it's, sorry. I apologize. Let me
it's
go
all
here real
right.
quick. Where's that note?
Huh.
I don't find it now. But when you look into the word, place my name, like God has placed his name on Israel, he has placed his name on the land. And that means in ancient Near East, is there such a thing when a father gives the name to something as a sign of authority and ownership?
I think so. Yeah. And so that's probably what's going on there. That
So
would
if
be my
someone would attack, let's say, your land, and is your land and your property and your name, your honor is based on that,
yes.
wouldn't be an affront to attack your land and you have the right to defend yourself.
Right. Exactly right.
It's exactly what the Bible says.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when the Bible says there's no weapons formed against us, if we are called by his name, like in Isaiah says, then if anyone attacks us and we belong to God through the adoption process, we have the inheritance, we abide to the commands, then we have the end result, the gift of God, which will be salvation.
Yeah,
If anyone touches us, it's an affront to God.
that's right. And so he defends us.
Perfect.
Yeah. No.
This is
So
awesome.
so all of this can now we can take all of this and put it into our theology and make application and say, oh, now I this is why I can feel good about myself, because that's what God thinks about me.
Yeah.
I'm a real son, even though I might think lousy things about myself. My wife and I think I've told you, we go to adult and teen challenge and teach. And
Mhm.
so, we bring up these concepts, and I love to go from Ephesians and talk about the fact that
Yeah.
these are all the things that God has showered upon us.
When I went to a jail to minister, I did a teaching about honor and shame, and I conveyed to them the honor that God has given us, even if we are captive. And I told them, I says, you're captive right now because of consequences happen in your life, but we, all of humanity, we are captives to
Yeah.
the consequences that happen in Adam, and death now reigns. And through
Death.
the Messiah, regardless whether you're in jail or outside, you are free from that particular, from death. We're free people.
Yeah.
So we have a lot to be grateful for.
Amen.
So, Professor, thank you so much. As always, an awesome class. I loved it. I learned a lot.
It's
And
always fun. It keeps me on my toes.
that's good. That's
Yeah,
good.
very much.
Do we cover enough on adoption, you think?
I it all depends. I mean, there's a whole lot more going on there. We can get into the weeds next time, whatever you want.
Well, you pick the topic and I go back and research. Okay, so you guys in the audience, so you know what goes on. When he selects a topic, he sends me an article, he recommends something, I go read it. And then I try to prepare myself. Some of the stuff I read before, but I got to reread again and practice and then ask good questions. And it's making me better, and I'm grateful. So we'll see you maybe. You can't do it next week, right? You're gonna
I
be
think
busy.
I think I could.
Okay, let me know. We'll
So,
meet up again. So
all
thank you,
right.
Professor. Hey guys, thank you for joining us. I pray that these teachings are helpful. They're edifying you because it helps me tremendously. The day I found out the importance of the language of adoption in the New Testament, it made a huge impact in my life because I realized that the God of creation saw me in my state, although I had nothing good to offer him, yet he still chose to
Yeah.
seek after me and the opportunity to return to the kingdom to give me an inheritance that I know I do not deserve. So
Yeah.
consider that as you listen to these teachings, although we give you a lot of facts, a lot of dates, a lot of maps and stuff, consider that this is interconnected with our spiritual walk and that we are to be grateful to God for everything He's given us. So please subscribe to Wisdom and Torah Ministries and go learn with us. And also look up Professor Mark Chavalas. As you know, he has all kinds of books that you can go get. Professor, really quickly, show them a few of the books that you have there that are yours.
Well, this one on Emar I edited about 30 years ago, and so that's one of them. It's simply called Emar, edited by Chavalis. Shouldn't be hard to find.
Okay.
Just a little volume. And I think we saw this one before, the Mesopotamia in the Bible. So
Yeah.
those are the two that I just had sitting over here.
Then you have the Chronological Bible, which you were a
Yes.
contributor. Also, the IVP commentary, which you are also a big contributor to that.
Yeah.
And the one on the logos, um, that I read a whole bunch of articles that you have on that.
The is that the Zondervan
The
illustrated one?
Sundervan, yes, the
Yeah.
Sundervan one. It was very,
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah.
So thank you guys. We'll see you guys next week. And thank you, Professor, for always being so kind to be here with us. Okay.
All right.